All right, so Warden. I watched it. It was really interesting. I really enjoyed the documentary style way that
Oh,
you told
nice.
this story, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be like the entire movie or whether we would actually get like a few clips of just like watching Warden do his thing. But I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it just being a documentary like all the way through. Can you tell us a little bit about why you made that choice and why you decided to make it into a documentary style?
Yeah, I think it came from the script. The script I read, Steve Zerling, Sarah Kingan, and Jeff, they were the original producers and writers. Jeff was the writer. So they approached me with the script at the time, and it was written as a documentary. So you
Okay.
would read like the talking heads and the
Hmm.
scenes described, because you never see a documentary written as a screenplay, right? Because a documentary,
Hmm.
the process of creating a documentary, like you have a storyline, you know what to do, and then you record the interviews.
Yeah.
You might write interviews, you might write scenes based on the interviews later.
Hmm.
So it's more of a different process. But this one was written to be recorded documentary. So, and when I read it, it had everything that I liked
Hmm.
exploring in my films. Like it's a genre film, but told with a spin, so it's not really what you expect.
Hmm.
Um, and it has the political aspect and
Yeah.
kind of a society reflection aspect. I loved exploring those themes, and
Hmm.
I fell in love with the script, and I thought, oh, I want to do it, and so it was actually meant to be like that from day
From the
one. Yeah.
beginning. Awesome. And you mentioned this like the societal aspect as well. One of the things that I noticed is we do get to see like hear from individuals like his girlfriend and other people in the community, but we don't actually get to see, like kind of like street interviews or anything like that, where you just kind of get like a pulse on, what people are actually thinking outside of like tweets and stuff. Was that intentional as well?
Yeah, it was the way it was written.
Okay.
But yes, we could have explored a little bit of the people. We actually had a couple scenes that we had to cut.
Mhm.
Mostly we had we have some limitations during production due to COVID. That was
That makes
recorded
sense.
in
Yep.
pretty much uh end of the first year of COVID. So we
Oh,
had some
wow.
production restraints, right? So
Yeah.
we try to cut as many scenes that would be more challenging to record at the time.
Hmm.
But at the same time that COVID made this, we had restraints based on COVID protocols and stuff.
Yep.
The same thing also helped us into producing this in a very shoestring budget
Mm.
and designing the production to work on COVID protocols
Mm.
in a way helped us because it was a very tiny um, production structure. Like for instance, all the interviews, it was just
Yeah.
me and the actor,
Yeah.
one at each time. So I had 1 or 2 days with each actor. That was as they had, of course, lots of lines.
Hmm. Hmm.
Each one of them had like maybe 20 pages of script
Yeah.
worth of lines. And we only had 1 day to shoot everything. And it was just me and them, me
Hmm.
operating 2 cameras, microphone, and directing because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
So it was trying to be safe at the time.
Hmm.
So in a way, that actually, if we because we had a little bit of financing at the beginning
Hmm.
before COVID, and then we would have shot that a little different
Hmm.
creatively. It would be a little bit more of a bigger production. But then we lost financing, and that
Hmm.
when I took over as a financier and I
Hmm.
produced the way I produced my short films.
Hmm.
So very, very small
Yeah.
crews, which I love. I
Yeah.
transition between small and big crews. Like when I shoot commercials, it's always
Hmm.
big sets and a lot of people you don't
Hmm.
even know what they're doing on the sets. And then all of a sudden I'm shooting some short films in which
Hmm.
only it's me, camera, maybe a couple more people helping on the crew side, and then the actress. It's actually nice. I
Hmm.
like, stepping both worlds.
Nice.
Um, Creatively, it's interesting too.
Yeah, I can imagine that, having kind of the duality and being able to explore both. What was it that you liked the most about having such a small like set, such a small crew to work on this movie?
I think the dynamic of it. Also, I think the actors like to. I tend to observe actors when they work with smaller crews.
Hmm.
It feels almost like more intimate, and
Mm.
the connection between director and actor, it can be more like bonded.
Hmm.
because sometimes you have bigger crews. You as a director, you're guiding a lot of stuff. Sometimes the actor may feel a little forgotten there.
Hmm.
And this one is like there's more conversation, there's more
Yeah.
dialogue, which feels more of an intimate process, and it I think creatively it gets benefits. Plus, you move
Hmm.
faster,
Hmm.
right? You less time waiting for setup changes, so you have to think of smaller setups and faster setups. So you don't have to wait for 40 minutes, for a simple camera change of
Hmm.
angle. So I think, there's goods and bads, of course.
Hmm.
But even when I have bigger budgets, I try to
Hmm.
design production as just the essential people on set, which
Nice.
makes everything faster, and even working with cameras, I love working with smaller cameras packages. So
Hmm.
like, because the most frustrating thing for a director is like, just let's change a little bit of the angle, just for changing the camera from one place,
Yeah.
point A to point B takes like 15 minutes.
Hmm.
Changing one lens, it's like 15 minutes setup calibration. And
Yep.
it's, oh my God. So I kind of like that to be able to move faster on set.
Hmm.
Of course, with safety, because you cannot
Hmm.
be rushing and
Yeah.
you might have a camera crash or something. But
Absolutely.
I like to feel like we're moving forward as
Hmm.
we progress.
Nice. I was going to actually ask about your camera setup and you mentioned like the interview room, it was like sit down, two cameras. How
Yeah.
did you go about like shooting all the different types? Because there's like, homemade videos, there's like, almost like selfies. There, like, was that all sort of shot on different cameras, or did you do a lot of sort of that in post to make it look like it's, shot in different ways?
Yeah, there was no formula or technique. It was really like the documentary format. In a way, it helped us creatively because it embraced all types of camera visual languages, right?
Hmm.
Because that's the ideal scenario in a documentary is like you have different cameras
Hmm.
shooting different styles, things that should look like real life,
Hmm.
things that should look more amateur in a way, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like someone in the street that filmed. It shouldn't look like a cinematic
Yeah.
or anything. So in a way that we embrace that language.
Hmm.
And of course, for the interviews, we had a more of a controlled lighting setup, and
Hmm.
it had to look like, of course, as it was in a real documentary.
Hmm.
But every other scenes from newscaster, for new
Hmm.
casting, or just people randomly shooting in the streets or home videos,
Hmm.
we kind of embrace all visuals styles, right? So we use many cameras,
Nice.
but also we had some adding textures in post.
Hmm.
So we kind of embraced many techniques. There was
Nice.
post, raw from the camera, color corrected or
Hmm.
color corrected to still look like realistic,
Hmm.
not too overproduced. So we believe we reached a interesting balance.
Yeah.
That it serves the style of the film, it serves the story, right? Because
Hmm.
we didn't want to feel like, oh yeah, it's nice, but I don't believe this is real life because
Yeah.
that's not how people would shoot it, like
Yeah.
shallow depth of field or anything like that, in a
Yeah.
newscasting footage.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, yeah, trying to emulate real life in a way.
Yeah. No, you did a fantastic job. It felt like I was watching a documentary.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really loved also like the artwork that you had included for like the comic book pages. They kind of featured a little bit in the movie, not a whole lot, but can you tell us a bit about that as well, including that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a big part of the film is paying homage to
Hmm.
the comic books history and even like connecting the character to his to the influence of the comic books had on him.
Hmm.
So that's actually some of the most interesting parts for me, to see the
Hmm.
connection of real life and comic books, and of course we illustrated. So that's a mix of we licensed some illustrations, but also commissioned a very this up and rising artist here in Brazil to draw some of the illustrations, including our alternative poster and stuff. So it's kind
Hmm.
of like using that to illustrate what was being said in the film. So it was a mix again, a mix of techniques like
Yeah.
licensing, some of the stuff I drew myself, some of the
Oh,
stuff
nice.
we commissioned artists to do.
Hmm.
It was really nice. Yeah, I like the process in general
Yeah.
because it was kind of like constructing, building from because this film took a few years to be
Hmm.
done completely, right? So
Hmm.
obviously the production we had to do in one run.
Hmm.
But then the post-production, it was growing as we moved. Of course, we locked the cut
Hmm.
with the interviews because I knew from what actually made me confident that I could pull this with very little budget
Hmm.
was okay, if I don't have any money, if I only shoot this 6, 7 interviews, I
Hmm.
have a film. It's not going to be
Yeah.
super interesting because it's just the interviews back to
Hmm.
back. But the more money I can get, more coverage I can put in the
Hmm.
film and illustrate what they've been talking. So I think at the end, of course, I wanted to have more
Hmm.
coverage and more scenes outside of the interviews,
Yeah.
but it was the balance that I we could have in a way that it's not only interviews, but
Hmm.
it's not. I wish I had more, but I
Yeah.
think we hit a we hit a balance that I think it's good. I mean,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, for sure. And going to what you had mentioned about the influence from comic books, one of the first things I noticed that kind of strays away from that is his first public appearance. He goes straight on TV and starts, just reveals his identity and his name and everything, which is not
yeah.
typical, of, comic books or superheroes. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
Um, yeah, I think we're even in the film. One of the characters he explains the superhero models, right?
Yep.
Which you have the one that covers his face, the other that I'm this guy and
Hmm.
I don't care about secret identity. So
Hmm.
we picked one of those and we ran with it, which was he's just showing himself. He wants to be more of a celebrity. And in a
Hmm.
way, we're kind of playing with that celebrity thing that we
Yeah.
not currently, but it's something that's been, for centuries here. But now with the social media, the celebrity thing. So we wanted to explore that theme a little bit more, not
Hmm.
just the superhero and the hero. Oh, I want you to be my hero, my protector, but also the celebrity part
Yeah.
which everybody's our society and modern society nowadays like all drawn to celebrity like the influencers
Oh, yes.
it's so it was deliberate in a way that it's another element to explore
Hmm.
and reflect upon so that's why we went with that choice.
Nice. And do you think that choice influenced his trajectory throughout, the documentary or just as a character? Or do you think if he had made a different choice where he kept his identity secret, he wouldn't have necessarily ended up in the same place that we see him towards the end of the movie?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. It makes me also think
Yeah.
harder to answer. But yeah, definitely. I think, once you put your face into something, right?
Hmm.
Psychologically, you more bound to that what you're defending to. And
Hmm.
I think that was one of the elements that made his arc towards the film, right? So
Hmm.
now it's his persona. Everybody knows him, and he doesn't want to let people down, but at the same time, he's going on this very dangerous path that we
Hmm.
know very well, looking
Hmm.
at history, that
Hmm.
tyrant path journey. And but I think it started with, showing himself
Hmm.
and putting him like, okay, I'm this guy. And
Hmm.
once you're covered by masks, and we even mentioned that in the
Hmm.
documentary, like the old warriors that would cover
Yes.
themselves with masks so they create a different persona. So
Hmm.
this wasn't a different persona, it was
Hmm.
him. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of shaped him towards he didn't start as a bad figure, but he
Yeah.
became that bad figure that he doesn't see himself as a bad figure. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was part of his journey. Yeah, to
Hmm.
the things that made him uh, uh, become what he became at the end of the film.
Yeah. And do you think that choice also to be unmasked and given the fact that he was young, that made him accessible to like, people out in public who have their own interests that can then sort of shape him to their own needs, right? Like all of the different business owners that he then started doing things for because they were funding him and being like good friends with him. Do you think that the decision to
Yeah,
unmask? made him more accessible to those types of people.
Yeah, I think in a way when you unmask you become more you humanize yourself more,
Yeah.
right? So you're not that kind of a this untouchable masked figure that nobody knows really.
Hmm.
You would become more of an institution if you masked in
Yeah.
a way, right? So you see some even artists in the internet that they're masked. So in a way you cannot connect
Hmm.
humanly with that person. And I think of course it creates further connections with people. So
Hmm.
you, and nowadays it's either 50% hate, 50% love. So, and I think when you show your face, it's even easier to
Hmm.
everybody that expose
Hmm.
themselves a lot. I think, in my understanding or my observations is, you have an athlete, and this athlete, for instance, is showing himself a lot in the internet,
Hmm.
personal life and stuff. He creates that percentage of people who loves everything about him, and the other like
Hmm.
just start hating him for no
Yeah.
reason or for some
Yeah.
reason. And I think that's because he's exposing, and that's not just with athletes, with anybody, right? And
Hmm.
then and I think once you just become that, if you just become an athlete and you don't share your person, so in a way, like people don't follow you too much, but they also
Hmm.
won't hate or won't love you too much, right? So
Yeah.
in a way, showing himself
Hmm.
fully, it creates more connection for
Yeah.
the better, for the worse, I guess.
Yeah.
Again, everything was our observations and
Hmm.
interpreting, trying to create that sense of if this was real life, I think
Hmm.
that's what would happen on our current state of society. Maybe this wouldn't be true in the 80s.
True.
Um, and for instance, reading Watchmen, the
Hmm.
comics Watchmen, when I read that in the early 2000s,
Hmm.
I had a big impact towards the end,
Hmm.
right? But to me now, I don't know if you're familiar with Watchmen, the end, but to me,
Hmm.
on the current state of our society and social media and fake news and all that kind of stuff we go through, that ending of that comic, it's not as powerful as before because that doesn't stick anymore. Like
Yeah.
whoever read will know what I'm talking.
Yeah.
Because now with fake news, different realities, different rewriting history, people are rewriting history in a
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah.
So again, Warden is it's a reflection on our current state. I don't know how
Hmm.
it's going to be in 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
So it was made for today's society. Yeah.
Nice. And I think there was also like an interesting thing with how he was trying to like he made himself available to the public, but then he was also trying to keep that relationship that he had like really private and out of the spotlight. And he was saying that, it's to protect her. But was there a part of him that also like not just to protect her, but also wanted to kind of have people connect with him more as an individual and not have somebody else sort of attached to him?
Another great question that I have to think hard as well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I don't want to, in a way, spoon feed,
Yeah, that's true.
things. Because I guess
If
the cool part of everything is everybody has a reflection on his
hmm
actions and the way he does things. And of course, I'm gonna give you my interpretation, which doesn't it's not supposed to be the only one, because
Yeah.
to me, everybody has a vision, and to
Hmm.
me, it's like honestly, if you ask me on a not as a director but an audience, I would say I think he was at one point just lost.
Hmm.
It's everything's happening is unprecedented, right?
Hmm.
In a way, it's like he's testing things and seeing how things are reacting to things on this, he doesn't
Hmm.
have prior knowledge. He's probably
Yes.
has people talking to him, do this, do that. Even
Hmm.
his girlfriend in the film says,
Hmm.
they put me in a room with a bunch
Yeah.
of, managers and whatever,
Hmm.
um, and assistants, and they're all telling me to do this. But I mean, being also as my personal experience, in even getting to the industry,
Hmm.
you receive a lot of advices that when
Yeah.
you don't really know if it's good or bad advice. Sometimes you
Hmm.
take it, sometimes you don't. And
Hmm.
then when you take advice and later on saying, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Why this
Yeah.
person told me to do this, and now I know. I mean, I think that was happening to him.
Yes,
Did
for
this,
sure.
oh, don't show anybody. You have to be the persona and whatever. And he was, it's so
Mm,
familiar, right? Like when you see
yeah.
rising stars and
Hmm.
all of a sudden they're acting different
Hmm. Hmm.
because maybe someone that they trust telling them to do this.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think it's lots of this film. I think it's a film that it gives you room to reflect on
Hmm.
and find the answers yourself in a way,
Yes.
right? Because there's no spoon-fed answers here I can
Hmm.
give. Because to me, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I try to put it in the cloud of possibilities for
Hmm.
people to reflect on it. Even if you're right wing, left wing, I mean, there is different interpretation of from watching this, considering where you're coming from, right?
Yeah.
And you might have different thoughts. Even I had that type of thoughts when I released my first short film called The Flying Man,
Yes.
which was rather successful at the time, got like 20, 25 million views.
Hmm.
At the time, the internet, the algorithms weren't that strong. So a lot of people found it and watched, and, it
Yeah.
got in the mainstream media and everything. And funny enough, it's been 10 years. And I always read comments because
Hmm.
that's the fun of it, seeing how people
Hmm.
are reacting to your work. And the comments I got 10 years ago are very different from the comments I got today based
Yeah.
on where we are in the world,
Yes.
right? At the time, they were talking a lot about drones and stuff and,
Hmm.
war drones. And now it's
Yeah.
different. It's more of a, alt-right
Yeah.
movements. And
Yeah.
it depending where people are,
Hmm.
they see different, right?
Yes.
And throughout time it changes as well, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
when we watch an old sci-fi film that, oh, they were
Hmm.
ahead of the times, but maybe that
Yeah.
was made for a different time. But then you look with the fresh eyes from
Yeah.
the future, and you see that different.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of cinema and art form, right? So everybody comes from a different place, and they're
Yes.
right to have different interpretations. They're right to be pissed, maybe, or to be, wow, that's cool. Because I know this film is not for everyone. It might be deceptive. You're watching a superhero film, but it's not
Hmm.
told as a
Hmm.
superhero film. But
Yeah.
one thing I can guarantee, it's something that people are not expecting.
Yeah.
And
No, for
I'll
sure.
put this way, right? It's different from any superhero film, as per
Yeah.
se.
And that's kind of the beauty of art and cinema as well, is that it does reflect, like you were saying, like the state of the current world and also like the state of what people are finding fear in. Like I think like Spider-Man's origin stories in the movies change depending on during that time
Yeah,
period what it was that people were most, talking about and afraid of.
totally.
Um, and the other thing too with this documentary style is we never actually hear from Warden himself. We only ever get like clips from interviews or, like videos that other people had provided, but we never actually hear from him. And so there's kind of like built-in bias almost into the movie because of just the way that, he is just like missing out of the equation, which also like
Yeah.
makes you think and wonder, like, and throughout the entire movie, I was like trying to figure out like, his state of mind and what he's thinking and what he's going through. And you're only ever getting that information secondhand, which I think is like the beauty of this movie as well, is like you're trying to understand his state of mind. But like you were saying, it's kind of like real life, where if we were to get a superhero in real life like this, most of us are not going to have access to the superhero. And so
Yeah,
we're just
yeah.
going to be constantly like, wondering and interpreting what they're, thinking and their purpose and their goals and everything are, which is really cool.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you basically laid out everything that I was thinking. It's basically trying to emulate how it would be because you may hear from him, but you're never gonna have a clear entrance on what
Yeah.
he's actually thinking or
Yeah.
his most vulnerable thoughts.
Yeah.
It's actually through different outlets that you're gonna
Hmm.
learn from. That's how we learn from everybody, right? So
Yeah.
that's usually a reflection I have for myself. It's like when
Hmm.
you're hating or loving someone that you don't know too much, something is
Yeah.
like a little off. So you shouldn't be hating on, of course, some people you should hate a lot, but I mean, no, you know who they
There are,
are in
yep.
terms of in history, but
Yeah.
I mean, but in general, like if you're watching someone that is not killing people, or it is just speaking,
Mm,
and you hate that person, you got to think, wow, why I
yeah.
hate that person so much?
Yeah.
Maybe you're just consuming stuff, or why I love
Exactly.
this person so much if you don't even know him personally. Because
Yeah,
I also
exactly.
like we all have friends that we know they don't look like themselves online. For instance, like social media, they look
Hmm.
like different people, right?
Hmm.
So say, oh, this person is so much cooler in person than what he's been posting lately.
Hmm.
Why? And I mean, I have that kind of stuff, and then I have that kind of thought, and I would try to make that into, in the film
Hmm.
on perspective, because perspective to me is very important on any film, right?
Yeah.
And to me, the twist of my first film, The Flying Man, it was
Hmm.
to shift perspectives. Like
Yeah.
I tell that story from the criminal perspective, which makes it
Mm,
look like a horror film.
yeah.
And that's the same with Warden. It's like we're gonna get info from Warden as we would get in the real world, which
Hmm.
is through interviews of people who know him.
Yeah.
And I try to create this cluster of people that they're from both sides, right? So you have their allies,
Hmm.
the ones close to him,
Hmm.
and the enemies,
Yeah.
they're the opposers. I won't say enemies, it was
Yes.
like are the opposers.
Yeah.
So you kind of get from every part, and then you make your own opinions,
Yeah.
right? Based on what that's exactly how it happens in
Hmm.
real life, right? So
Exactly.
you end up with that 30% hate, 30% love, and these 40% that kind of shifts from one side to
Yeah.
another when, depending.
Awesome. And speaking of the Flying Man, you've had a few different projects that are based around superheroes. There's also The Great Kaniso. What is your interest in telling these superhero like stories, exploring these like, moral dilemmas and consequences that are different than, the typical superhero movie that we would see? What brought about this interest?
Yeah, I think that's a constant theme for me that lingers,
Mm.
on my creative
Hmm.
thoughts. It's basically giving a lot of power to someone
Mm.
and see how disruptive it becomes in the society, right?
Mm.
That's what kind of drives me to make those superhero films,
Hmm.
and playing with that. So that's why I love Watchmen. I love,
Mm.
comics like Marvel's, which, kind of explores more of the society
Hmm.
consequence of having that disruptive figure acting. It's
Hmm.
almost like let's not. I like the phrase of great powers come great responsibility,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So that's a theme that I love exploring in a realistic way, and
Hmm.
then I like the grounded take, the realistic take. I love that. Even for my horror films, try to create something that you feel like it could happen.
Hmm.
Um, so that's where I'm more inclined to explore, right? So I did the Great Kniso,
Yeah.
just a smaller one. I try to give like, okay, this teenager,
Hmm.
same actor as Warden. I don't know if you noticed, but it's the same
Yep,
actor.
it is. I noticed.
Yeah, that was my first time working together. But I mean, it's this teenager finding his powers, but
Mm.
all of a sudden he finds in the wrong way that it can cause a lot of harm, right? It's not
Yes.
just the good things, and it
Yeah, that was a
just
great
make
twist.
thanks. Yeah, it just make automatic people think automatically, oh my God. I mean,
Yeah.
wow, I wasn't expecting that, but you
Yeah.
should be expecting that, right? When you
Yeah.
give too much power to someone,
Yeah.
you're never always gonna have good things, right? And it's we see that happen in our world, right? Like
Mhm.
people with too much power creating balance and the responsibility they have, and
Yeah.
wars are decided on closed doors, and then
Hmm.
millions of people are being impacted. So this
Yeah.
happens, that's where I draw my inspiration to explore those themes, and why so many people have to suffer for,
Hmm.
from closed door decisions, that it's not, some people are voted to be there, but
Yeah.
to decide for
Yeah.
the better good, but apparently it's not based on the better good. It's decided by different interests that I I wouldn't know, of course.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think
Yep.
those were those themes to explore superheroes. Superheroes to
Yeah.
me, they're just that surface to be exploring that kind of it's easier to get people to watch this
Yeah.
instead of something that it's so I think it makes people think more when they see something that they can compare to real world.
Yeah.
And that's where I take my inspiration from.
That's awesome. I love that it's like grounded in that sort of like political commentary and reality. We are like just over half an hour. How are you on time right now? Still
I'm
okay?
good.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, Zoom was going to kick us out in like 8 minutes anyways. I do have like a couple last questions that we can go through.
Yeah.
So you mentioned The Watchmen, you mentioned Marvel. Are like what specific superheroes do you enjoy today, and are they different than the superheroes that you enjoyed growing up?
Um, I think it pretty much the same. I
Okay.
used to love and still love the X-Men,
Mhm. Yes.
mostly because of the society.
Yeah.
And it was funny enough because when I released the Flying Man,
Mhm.
and then I shift perspectives, right?
Yes.
And then make the superhero super scary. There was a lot of people at the time placing comments saying, "Oh, now I understand why people are so afraid of the X-Men." And they're in a
Ah,
way, it's
that's
like we
awesome.
never experienced X-Men through the population
Yep.
point of view, which,
Hmm.
be honest, it might be scary as hell
Hmm.
to see, oh, there's like all those group with a lot of powers. I don't know what
Yeah.
their intent to. They might, of course, following through their perspective. We know they're good,
Hmm.
some of them good
Yep.
good people, and we know that they don't want any harm.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of analogy to racism and a lot
Yeah.
of stuff, but shifting perspective,
Hmm.
which I mean, it's a great exercise to be done in the real world for everything,
Hmm.
to be
Hmm.
honest. And that just creates a spin, right?
Yep.
So I've seen, and then I found it very curious. And just answering your question,
Hmm.
the X-Men was something that I always
Hmm.
watched and read. Even back in the day, they used to have the cartoons,
Hmm.
X-Men.
Yep. Yep.
Used to love with the
Yes.
comics, but some new books as well. I love, which is there's a trilogy of books of superheroes. What's again the name? I've read all of them, and I'm very fascinated by. Let me just try to find
Yeah.
here the name. Give me 1 second,
Yeah. Take your time.
because it's the from Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
Um, you know, what's that? Steel Heart. Steel
Okay.
Heart, the trilogy. I don't know if you've seen those books. I think
I
one is
personally haven't, but
called Calamity. The first one is Still Heart.
mhm.
And it's super good. It's also explores as well the real world. If
Mm.
all of a sudden some I think there's something that approaches the earth and that
Mm.
makes some people develop powers, but
Okay.
they all become villains, right? And
Oh.
are ruling different parts of the earth, and it's
Okay.
super good. And I mean, those are modern takes on. It's not a super. And then there's a group of people who hunts them, hunts the
Okay.
enemies, and they have to find their
Okay.
weaknesses,
Oh,
and they go.
interesting.
But what's interesting is what the society becomes
Hmm.
after they appear. And
Okay.
and you lose, of course, all, because at first people were trying to study them, and all
Hmm.
of a sudden they realize, oh my God, we're so powerful, so
Hmm.
let's take over. And and whatever they would do, the local, I mean, the authorities and the system would just
Hmm.
consider natural disaster, just so they don't have to. And that, I thought it was really smart. I mean, if you have a superhero, and then all of a sudden, okay, I'm gonna break this building.
Yep.
There's
Like,
nothing you can do.
no.
All you can do is like, okay, this was a hurricane, so
Yep.
it's well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
That's a realistic take. It's not
Yeah.
someone arresting this superpower being that you can never
Exactly.
arrest him.
And that's kind of like
I think,
Warden. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's kind of like what we see with Warden as well, is like he's just so overpowered that like the police is like realistically can't even
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah,
Like
it's more like
we can't contain
optics,
him,
right?
we can't exactly, we can't arrest him, we can't do anything without his own cooperation. So it kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
that is an interesting
It,
dilemma for sure.
it's yeah, it's more like optics in a way,
Yeah.
right? So you still show, but and that was the second stage. The third stage was like, okay, the world's more of a post-apocalyptic because
Hmm.
every order that society system and order, it kind of fell apart because of those
Uh,
beings.
yeah.
So I thought it was an interesting, realistic
Mm,
take.
mm.
And I think it's called, yeah, the first one is called Steelheart, which is the
Okay.
name of the enemy that takes over Chicago, and I think
Mm.
it makes everything dark. Or
Oh wow.
I read a few years ago, but I thought it lingers because it's really
Yeah.
interesting. So answering your question,
Yeah.
yes, I think I have a bit of the past and
Yeah.
some of the modern ones that are coming as well.
That's awesome. And then going back to The Flying Man, I did see that it was currently being developed as a feature film. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Well, Flying Man, it's about resilience
Hmm.
because ever since I released the short film, and that's one thing I don't talk publicly too much, but I think I'll take the opportunity to
Yeah, go ahead.
answer because I have people every day, every week writing on YouTube, where is the feature film?
Oh,
Come on,
yeah.
that kind of stuff. And we all know the system is to make a film is really hard, and it's
Hmm.
being on different stages of development and
Hmm.
through and it's being on the studio system through
Hmm.
Columbia Pictures. So we had a good time there, a good run, but I mean, for many reasons, it just didn't go forward.
Hmm.
We rewrote the script a few times. We currently are sitting on I'd call a good turning point. And
Hmm.
I
Okay.
think, and after all those years, I never seen any film that would look like The Flying Man,
Hmm.
and which has, of course, still the short film DNA,
Hmm.
which is a horror film
Yeah.
with the superhero, but also the themes that you see on Warden, which is
Hmm.
how a society would actually react and how scary
Yeah.
it would be to have this being deciding who's guilty, who's not, and
Yeah.
there's no system, no,
Hmm.
so we tap into all those things, and now we're in a good turning point that I'm very hopeful that hopefully this year, next year, we move forward with it. Um,
Awesome.
I won't give up,
Yeah,
and
no,
if I
don't.
have to, I'll make it myself as we did on Warden. And but I'm trying to do that with a little bit more resources so I can
Hmm.
actually make exactly what I envisioned for this one. And that's when I know the project is right, is after so many years, I'm still
Hmm.
passionate about it. And I
Yeah,
still
absolutely.
believe that this, and people, when they look at it, they also like it. They also
Hmm.
believe. But for a reason or another, COVID was really harsh
Yeah.
times. We're in a good moment before
Yeah.
COVID, but the COVID kind of sidetracked most of the projects
Yeah.
at the time, and then you have to start over. Yeah,
Got
it
it.
kind of created that void for filmmakers, kind of a two,
Mhm.
3 years void of hard to get anything financed, hard to
Yeah.
shoot anything that was already financed.
Yep, for sure.
Which was one, I had a very cool film that it fell apart because of COVID. We were like maybe a month from shooting.
Oh, wow.
It was super cool, but unfortunately, the COVID, and then
Hmm.
year after year, it ended up falling apart.
Hmm.
It was tough years. So in a way, Flying Man was in the midst of this.
Yeah.
So yes, it's never. I'm going for
Hmm.
it, and
Nice.
hopefully soon we're gonna be able to see. And I'm hoping to be of a more of a mainstream
Yeah.
release in a way, because that's of course, it's the dream of every
Yeah.
director, of course, but
Mhm.
yeah, the film is thought to be like it was the short film, right?
Nice.
Connecting with a lot of people.
Awesome. No, like keep going because I think I mean just even with the short film like as soon as you start going into like the perspective of the criminals, like that was like a very interesting take. Because like you see, the flying man come up and it's like, oh, well, this is a bad person killing people, and then it's like, oh, it's criminals, and then you're like, oh, I guess maybe it's not a bad thing, and then you
Yeah,
actually get
yeah,
to see like the criminal perspective, and you're like, should that like it's it creates
yeah,
like a really interesting,
yeah.
moral dilemma there for people to kind of ponder on. So
Yeah, it's
I
just
hope
shifting
yeah,
perspectives, right? And
absolutely.
that's the exercise I love doing,
Yeah.
because it makes people think, makes people reflect, and
Yeah.
it just creates empathy, in a
Absolutely.
way, right? When you try to see from a different perspective, people
Yeah.
keep saying that all the time, but
Yeah.
once you actually see, right, you
Yes.
get it.
Yeah.
That's why.
Absolutely. Um, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about when it comes to Warden or the Flying Man or any other projects that you're currently working on?
Well, first, I want to just to thank you
Oh, thank
so much,
you.
for the space here
Of course.
to talk about Warden. For us is super important to have that space and promote, indie filmmaking, right? Because
Hmm.
it's hard to get to people without the millions, right? And
Yes.
that space help us a lot, to be, finding different eyes for the film,
Hmm.
and you never know when, how it spreads.
Yeah.
uh, and it's really really, appreciated, to be here talking
Yeah.
to you about this,
Of course.
and for you to have so many great questions, and maybe think super hard to answer
Yeah.
them. Hopefully I did
Oh, no,
okay.
that was awesome. And thank you so much for your time as well. Like like I love indie movies in that they're always like giving you a unique perspective, and there's always like you were saying, like there's always new things to think about and new perspectives, and it creates empathy, and this is definitely one of those movies. So I really appreciate you taking the time and telling us a little bit more about it, a little bit more about it, and answering all of my questions.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure, it was a pleasure. I enjoyed
yeah,
the time, and
of
yeah,
course.
thank you very much.
Of course. And is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or like any upcoming
Well,
projects or anything like that?
I'd say Warden is available,
Yep.
Prime, Apple.
Nice. Yep.
If people are watching this without, seeing the film, I'd
Hmm.
recommend, you can rent by,
Yeah.
and it's Prime, Apple, cables, I think everywhere,
Awesome.
Xbox, YouTube, and
Nice.
yeah, and I hope they dig as well and see with fresh eyes something different. And yeah, I hope they have a good time watching.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, I think we'll end it here.
Thank you very much, and
Perfect.
have a great day too.
Awesome. You too. Thank you.